Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Michael Bartlett, and I'm really happy to speak on the topic of the esoteric rulers of the zodiac. I want to thank Linda for setting up a wonderful platform from which we're able to speak about astrology and share with others. And I'm really thankful for those of you who are able to attend today, and for those of you who are listening to it in the future. Thank you so much. Mercury turned retrograde today, so we had the Mars Neptune conjunction the other day. So it's, kind of an interesting period of time. So we'll just kind of take our time and see how we go through the period. So first of all, I want to say, when it comes to esoteric astrology, one of the things that helps to understand is if you have at least some sort of a working understanding of traditional personality or exoteric based astrology. In this case, what we're speaking of today, the rulership of each of the signs will help you understand kind of the higher octave that we're going to be talking about today with esoteric astrology. And of course, this is based in the work of the Theosophy movement of the late 19th century and the work of Alice Bailey, the Master DK, Alan Oken in the last 50 years, of course, has done a lot of great work. Michael Robinson with the Seven Rays Institute has done fantastic work, as well as many others. And of course, the Lucius Trust, where they just have a wide range of information and resources available for people who are interested in learning more about esoteric astrology and the esoteric or theosophical movement in general. And anytime that as I'm speaking, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I don't need to wait to any set time to be able to answer any questions, so please feel free to ask me. So what we're talking about, it's an interesting thing when we come to talk about esoteric rulership, because we're going to be looking at each of the signs and kind of seeing like how they're looked at in a traditional aspect, or what we call personality-based, ego-based, or exoteric, meaning kind of like the ways in which we operate or typically understand astrology on the ways we work on a daily level. When we speak about esoteric levels, these are people, we're talking about kind of switching it when people are kind of working on their spiritual path, what they're here to do, what their focus is. And so, of course, there's going to be a little bit of a modulation or a shift in each of the signs as far as a higher octave planet that is going to be relating to it in a way that shows the growth inherent within each of the signs, the spiritual growth. So we're going to talk about our first sign, of course. We're going to start with Aries. On the personality center, the traditional ruler, of course, is Mars. The esoteric ruler, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, is Mercury. And Mercury's function is the illuminating principle. I mean, when you think about it, Aries is very instinctual. It's a cardinal sign. It wants to go. One of the sayings for Aries, of course, is where angels fear to tread is where Aries goes. But with Mercury, you get this ability to consider things, to maybe plot and come up with ideas about structures. Mercury is not only about communication, of course, it is about a synthesizing and understanding about how movements need to be coordinated in such a way as to yes.
Sorry, Michael, sorry to interrupt. I'm not seeing your slides.
Oh, okay.
No,
thanks for telling me that.
Started off with them.
Let me see, it's not show shared screen. Let me do that, share here. How about now?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good, thank you, and thanks for letting me know. Okay, so on that sense, that's, Mercury operates, on many levels. So when we set out on a journey, when we set out on our way of finding our path, who better in a sense to have as a guide for stepping on that path but Mercury, the Hermes, the god of pathways, of crossroads, of the Herms, those stone cairns that you see where intersections of roads happen. So it makes sense, from Aries, instead of just charging and it's going to come through and it's going to be like, okay, how can I do this in the right way? So of course the Mercury, when you have Mercury in Aries, these individuals tend to be the seers of any age. When you consider that Mercury in Aries, it's an individual who's going to be have that spark of intuition, that spark of insight of things. This position serves, of course, oh, sorry about that. My phone just fell. Serves to lead humanity into the light of Buddhic consciousness, of that loving wisdom consciousness of the Buddha. And it works and acts as the vehicle for a great deal of soul activity. And when you think about it, Mercury is always that kind of a sense of intermediary. It's the one planet, as we know, the psychopomp, who's able to go up and visit Zeus up in the heavens at Mount Olympus, deal with the humans on the earth level, and go down and visit his brother Hades or Pluto down in the underworld. And so from personality and Mars, the saying is, let form again be sought. It's a very, but Mars wants to do it, Mars wants to impregnate things, right? So let form again be sought, be to incarnate, to come back into form. And from soul center to Mercury, I come forth, and from the plane of mind I rule. So it's not a function of one's desire nature, but of coming from a more intellectual approach, a more approaching a sense of synthesis, of taking the time and understanding how things work.
Michael, I have a question.
Sure.
About the previous slide.
Yep.
They say that Mars and Aries doesn't really think before it acts. It's very instinctual. So could you please address that contradiction that Mercury, that it's ruled by Mercury, esoterically ruled?
Sure. So when we're talking about anything here on this talk, we're going to be talking about the esoteric happenings, meaning these are individuals who are typically operating on some sort of a spiritual path, being here to be a world server, to make a difference on the planet. And so it's not operating, the planets aren't operating on that lower level. And so like if we talk about Mars and Aries, it'd be the same as talking about kind of Mars on the lower level presentation of Aries, where it could be very primal and very instinctual and very reactionary, versus the Mars that after a while has learned not to be so trigger happy, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. And introducing Vulcan. What's going on with this thing? So Vulcan is an interesting planet that exists. Some say theoretically, some say we don't have the instrumentation to be able to see it. Regardless, one can see it kind of as a point or a placement in the chart that shows where one has to let go of the ego. Usually it's within, roughly within the same sign as the sun. And so from that sense, esoterically, what we understand is the idea is to release the ego so that the spirit can come forward, release the me, my, mine-itis, the very me-oriented thing that prevents us, the selfish-oriented self that isn't about understanding that we're part of the greater collective. And so with Vulcan is here to show us something that's so close to the sun, so close to our ego, and yet can kind of come out of nowhere and eradicate things that need to be eradicated in our lives. We can kind of think of it in the sense of kind of like a Plutonic energy, and actually it's a higher octave sense of Pluto. For Taurus, our next sign, of course, is the ruler Venus on the traditional sense, and Vulcan. Vulcan is one of the ancient gods who took the weapons of his brother and sister gods and improved upon them. So if you think of something like a blacksmith, if you saw what that image was before with the two hammers and the anvil, you know, it works to forge, it beats, it hammers, it anneals, it makes things, it takes something and perfects it in such a way. But it also does that to the self. It's clearing the way, it's clearing the path, it's removing things, removing our attachments, bending the will of the lower centered or personality centered self or the selfish self to that of the higher self. You know, during these times, you know, that we're going through now with the COVID experience and also with the protests going on, we're all being brought to kind of into ourselves in such a way that we're being faced, and we have to kind of realize what are the important things that we want to hold on to and what is it that we need to let go. Vulcan is really kind of ruthless in the sense of Pluto, of removing these things that are in the way of you reaching your goal of selfhood. It's only really seen when you step onto what's called from the mutable cross to the fixed crosses, really kind of when you make not only a soul-centered intention, but a very conscious decision that you're here to walk your spiritual path, as opposed to just being stuck in kind of a lifetime of just consumerism, so to speak. Not that consumerism is bad, depends on where you are in your soul progression, of course. And it's not readily seen in the personality-centered individual. Not many people are going to understand how this Vulcan works, but you can see within people that that they get tested. It's very Scorpionic in the sense, like I said, that Plutonic. It's like Persephone. You know, there's this innocence that happens. You go along. Taurus, of course, is very innocent, but you go along, and then all of a sudden things are ripped from you in such a way that it doesn't give you the luxury and the freedom to be lost in that dream and that Maya any longer. And of course, Vulcan is located within 8 degrees, 20 minutes of the position of the sun. It's very interesting. There are some programs that have Vulcan in them. I haven't found one that really gives it definitively. A lot of esoteric astrology has to do with a certain level of mindfulness and presence and intuition. And so if you have a mid-sign sun, then chances are, you know, if you have a sun between 8 degrees of a sign and 22 degrees of a sign, then you likely have Vulcan in the same sign as your sun. But if you're like me, where you have a 6 degree Aquarius sun, you know, so I could have anywhere from an Aquarian to a Capricorn Vulcan. And so it just requires, yes, Carolyn?
I'm looking at Vulcan is located within 8 degrees of the position of the sun. On Astrodienst, I have Vulcan at 20 Virgo, but my Libra sun is 8 Libra. Is that weird?
Wide. It seems wide, but from what I understand, there's at least 3 calculation methods, and I've heard arguments that disband each of them. So it's one of those things I think you have to follow your intuition and see, you know, kind of where it is. Like for me, it feels like it's a lot more Capricornish for me, that I'm really here to kind of clear out that part of myself in Capricorn. But I mean, I think that would be something that, you know, with asking yourself some questions, whether you feel it's more Libran or more Virgoan for yourself, in that sense of where you've experienced the losses, where you've experienced those things that have been kind of taken away from you, so that you can understand and appreciate things from a different standpoint.
Thank you. That explains it.
Okay.
Sorry, could you please repeat how to find Vulcan in the chart?
Sure. So Vulcan is usually located within 8 degrees, 20 minutes of where your sun
but then how do you actually work that out, where it is exactly?
So, I mean, you could use any one of the programs. Like Carolyn talked about one program that puts hers back into Virgo. You can check on that. I tend to just kind of ask of the person, you know, it tends to be someone who's, you know, when you're stepping on this path where you're losing those things, where your attachments are kind of become pretty clear.
Would it be an asteroid? Would it be in the asteroid list?
I mean, it's one of those things that people say is a mystical planet. I mean, I think it's actually probably more formulaic than it is a physical body, because I think anything that would be that close to the sun would be swallowed up by it. But that's one of the mystical properties of it. I mean, this is where part of the hardship with this teaching is that there's a little bit of stuff that's, you know, we talk about the woo-woo in the New Age. This was a woo-woo back in the 19th century, the late 19th century, when Neptune was discovered. And, you know, so there's this element sometimes of believability. And so I think it's one of those where you kind of just, I feel that test it out for yourself and see how it plays out for you is probably the best I can say.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
And one of the things I have to say that I think is really wonderful about this teaching is in the beginning, DK basically says, you know, the master says that take what it is that works for you, test it against what your experiences are and see what's true, and what isn't, discard it, and what is, build upon it. And so I tend to have that kind of a personality about me anyway with the way I learn things. And so I feel it's really good for everyone to kind of take it into themselves, feel into, you know, what the truth is for themselves, and then move forward in a way that feels in harmony with yourself. And if it doesn't harmonize, if it doesn't feel right, try out something else, or maybe this isn't you know, this part of it isn't something that resonates with you yet, and that's perfectly fine. So on the Venus and personality side, let struggle be undismayed. You know, Taurus and Venus and Taurus loves a good love affair that's full of a lot of drama and juiciness, and you know, he loves me not, he loves me not, you know. So it's just this full display. The struggle is just completely present. It's presented so you can see it. And then from the Vulcan side, it's I see, and when the eye is opened, all is light. Taurus represents the one-eyed, you know, it's almost like the bullseye, the one-eyed focus of centeredness and understanding. And so when that awareness from the some of us also call it the first eye, when that first eye opens and allows that opening of sight and seeing, there's an understanding of and clarity that occurs.
Michael, I just found out how to find Vulcan on
Okay.
astro.com. You, under additional objects, you add H55. Okay, and that's a nice quick way to do it.
Perfect. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And just as a caveat with that, I would say that even though that's what, I mean, again, each program is an individual formula for figuring this out. So just because that's where it says it is, please, you know, ask yourself the questions. You know, you should see by house and by sign, you know, how that's really operating in your life. And that's the symbol. It's like a V with like a downward facing arrow. Just brings us right back into clearing things out. Gemini, lovely Gemini, ruled by Mercury, beautiful, talkative Mercury that wants to, you know, kind of what Linda was talking about earlier, you know, experience all those different many varied aspects of life and maybe not necessarily synthesize it. On the esoteric level is Venus, and Venus on the esoteric level is about a certain understanding of unification. And one of the things I really enjoy about the esoteric rulerships is it seems to me like there's a way of unfolding, a way of gradual understanding. And so, you know, if we think of Gemini as, one of my classic ways of understanding Gemini is it can look at a diamond or a stone and look at each of the faces and go like, oh, wow, that's so amazing. Look at this wonderful thing. Look what I've discovered. But it doesn't really understand that it's each of those faces is connected to one greater whole. And so with this Venus as being the ruler on the esoteric level, that's the understanding. It's Gemini getting to have that, what I like to consider with the air signs, that periscopic ability, that ability to rise above the sense of duality. All the air signs have an inherent duality in them. They're all dual signs. So which means that they're receiving at least two themes, two flows of energy, if not more. Gemini, as we all know, can, you know, run a lot of energy through it and kind of exhaust everyone around it, including the native itself. But when Venus comes in, it almost takes a breath. It kind of has to stop. I like the joke. Who do you call the listener when you have two Geminis together? The one who takes a breath. As a North Node Gemini, I can kind of appreciate that. So Venus on the esoteric level represents love, Earth's alter ego. I mean, Venus is that is Earth's sister, so to speak. Just like Venus is kind of, I mean, Mars is Earth's brother. It's the spiritual or higher self of the Earth. It's risen above matter. It's sort of been, what's the right way to say it? It's gone through the fires of purification to reach a higher level for its logoi. It converts knowledge into wisdom. Knowledge is that, for those of us who study astrology for a long time, you know, knowledge is gathering all that information. Gemini is really great. All of the air signs are really great at grabbing these with seemingly disparate pieces of information, gathering together and putting them together. But that knowledge, after it builds up for a while, it's that mixture of, when we love something, the mixture of knowledge and love is what gives us wisdom. It gives us this, what I think is that pure second ray of love wisdom, something that we just can't help but share with the world. Like what Linda's doing here is such a beautiful gift. Carolyn, how you share so many people's information, their websites and things, that's an example of how you're sharing the love, sharing that wisdom, sharing that gift around the planet, so we all know. Fanny, I'm sure in your own ways you're doing that as well. I don't know you personally, so love is about Venus is about right human relationship, because the other ruler, of course, for Venus on the personality level is Libra, which is about right human relationship. And it gives one the understanding of the spiritual purpose behind any relationship. I like to say that for those of us who have a certain level of cognition, when we meet people originally, we can scan them, we can see and understand kind of what we're going to encounter. And then we make a decision that we're going to engage on the personality level or here on the earth plane level. And that's when Maya comes in. That's where it kind of like comes over us. We kind of forget what we just read in that individual, and we engage in the dance, the Maya, the illusion of the earth plane. And what I like to say is usually at the end of the experience, depending on, especially if it ends up not turning out well, if you were to go back and consider what you remembered thinking in the first few moments of meeting the person, you probably would realize that if you had just followed your gut, you would understand the reality and the truth of what that person was and kind of what the relationship was coming for you. And if not, I really recommend kind of bringing yourself into that awareness if you can, because it's kind of a fun process that kind of allows us to have that relationship of having the experience as opposed to making it about failures in relationship which is typically how we look at it. And of course, Venus challenges duality on the personality level. Venus isn't going to allow for duality to exist. The polarization, what we're experiencing in our country, in our world, we're a very polarized world. Astrology is a polarized study. Each of the axes are polarizations of one another. The goal isn't about staying stuck on either one of those sides. The key is finding a graceful manner in which we are able to express ourselves along each of those continuums at any moment based on whatever it is that life is presenting to us from our highest good space, so that we can hopefully come out with a better relationship. We can hopefully not come from a place of reaction, which is typically what happens. Like what Linda said with Mercury earlier, with Gemini and Mercury, when Gemini gets upset, it just shoots off its mouth. That's just the first reaction. But if it can fall into its love, if it can fall into that Venus section of it and come from love and understand that person who's having that discussion with you is not competing with you, but is actually sharing another aspect of what it is you're discussing, then that's where the love and acceptance can come in. So from personality Mercury, let instability do its work. That's Mercury in Gemini is a very unstable energy. It's constantly moving. And from soul-centered Venus, I recognize my other self, and in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. That's the goal of the heart, right? And the goal of love and consciousness is to let it continue to grow and glow. This is fun. All right, Cancer. As we know, Cancer on the personality level is ruled by the moon. On the esoteric ruling, it is Neptune, which kind of makes sense. It goes from the personal waters, the moon waters, to the transcendental waters of acceptance. Neptune represents the initiator, the divine love made manifest. It's the redeemer of Mars and planet of the Christ. The redeemer of Mars, there's a whole series of what's called the 7 rays that are an aspect of this, which I'm not even getting into today. But Mars and Neptune are both on the 6th ray, which are rays of devotion. So I find it very fascinating that we just had a Mars-Neptune conjunction this last week. We're coming into this place of understanding, that we can't be treating people the way we've been treating segments of the population. We need to allow for and accept the beautiful love. I mean, the Christ energy is love energy. It's the 2nd ray. It's about agape. It's unconditional love of and acceptance of one another. And unfortunately, we have to go through some difficult, challenging places, and that Mars Neptune kind of brings that out. Where your Neptune is by house is where your Christ or your love consciousness is found. I like to think of it as also being your spiritual heart. It's illusion on the personality side, of course. Neptune can be that place where we kind of lose ourselves in our own Maya, in our own dream world, and it is also the love which holds all. And so it's love, but it's also the illusion of love, and it's the container of everything. So it's this, again, it's the transcendental waters. We are here because however many long time ago, many millions and billions of years ago, little cells were crawling in the waters, and they started joining with one another and became complex creatures, and we evolved here. And I think also there was an aspect of consciousness that also came in differently in addition to that. Neptune, of course, is the higher octave of the moon. Like I said in the beginning, one of the sayings in esoteric, in the esoteric teaching, is being personal to the impersonal and impersonal to the personal. Of course, moon is that really very personal part in our chart, and Neptune is about learning a way of being neutral about that, finding an impersonality of being in relationship to it that allows for acceptance, but doesn't rule us, doesn't make us react, doesn't hook us in such a way. And we haven't had Neptune in Cancer since May of 1916, and we won't have it again until 2065. I'll be 100 years old at that point, so I don't think I'm gonna have to worry about it too much. From personality and the moon, woo, woo. Let isolation be the rule, and yet the crowd exists. Cancer is the clan, it's like when you think about it, it's, how are we kind of trapped in our families? Cancer is not direct, it's the crab. It wants to run off to the side. It doesn't want to be caught up with things, and yet it really wants to be with a group. And from soul-centered Neptune, I build a lighted house and therein dwell. It's where we step onto that path and we accept it, and that inner light within ourselves radiates onto the path. Let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, good. Nice. Not doing quite as quickly as I should, but now Sun in Leo is very interesting because it is the Sun represents the esoteric and the exoteric ruler of Leo. This gives a very interesting play for how Leo is expressed and enjoyed. So the Sun is the source of our physical consciousness and the vehicle for the second ray. The soul sign purpose for these individuals include energies, temperament, and characteristics of the present incarnation, the nature of personality, life, and the equipment brought in from past for present, the force field. This is actually the Sun in general, to be honest. I don't know why I left that in here. I shouldn't have done that. The Sun here in this kind of a sense, and we talked about a little bit earlier, we all know that type of Leo energy that can radiate on the personality level. We have an individual who is in the White House who radiates from that kind of energy, even though his is a Mars on his ascendant. He radiates that sort of me, that self-centering energy of Leo. But the goal here, of course, is to let go of that ego and move into more of our heart-centered selves and love. And so on the esoteric level, it's about letting the heart radiate, letting the Sun move not from the place of the ego and from any place that has to do with the mind and the will, but from a place of the heart and from unconditional love. The sole purpose here is to create opportunities for the expression of consciousness, both individually, Leo, and for humanity, Aquarius. Because you got to understand too, when you have, wherever you have the Sun, there's something that we're going to get into in a little bit later, but we're going to have the planet Earth, which is diametrically opposed. So you're always in this position, you're going to have to really blend with the understanding of how to deal with the individual and the collective. So on the personality level, it's let other forms exist. I rule because I am. Like Louis XIV, l'état c'est moi, the estate is me. It's a very regal, very royal. That's that Leonine thing on the ego level. And on the soul-centered level is I am that, and that I am. Wonderful consciousness thing to kind of mess with your mind for a little bit. Then we move into something what's called, the moon is considered what's called a dead planet. And when, you could probably already consider, each of the points that I'm talking about here, because we've already talked about the fact of how the point is to become more impersonal. The point is to let go of our emotions, our attachments, our biological family patterns, our psychological issues and our problems that prevent us from moving things on. And in this sense, death really just means something that is non-regenerative emotionally. It's something that doesn't feed you really well. An addiction, in a sense, is something that that happens as a lunar issue sometimes, and it's something that can give you a little bit of a juice and make you feel good. But the truth is, it's not giving you that energy source that's really needed in your life. And so until we let go of those things that we are emotionally needy about, it's challenging for us to step into a place of allowing ourselves to be a little more impersonal to our personal selves. So for Virgo's ruled by Mercury traditionally, but on the esoteric level, it's kind of interesting because, you think, oh, if it's a dead planet, how can it rule a sign? That seems kind of like an odd oxymoron. I remember thinking that when I thought about it. But when we think about it, there are those higher octave aspects of the moon, which is, for one sense, the universal mother. That's what Virgo is. The Virgo is the sign that holds the Christ child within, that holds the consciousness, the seed, so to speak, of the unconditional love of what our solar system is. Did you have a question, Carolyn? No, okay, good, sorry. So the sole purpose here is to reveal the indwelling purpose and function of love within the forms of life. This particular placement involves a very strong loving devotion to service because it's the second and sixth ray, which is love and devotion, and especially to the lower plant and animal kingdoms, as they are representatives of loving light. One way you can kind of see with, like a Virgo who works really consciously is, you think about animal husbandry, although, I don't like it because it's more of a masculinized way of saying it, but it's those ways of caring for animals, caring for gardens, the ways that people have, that higher Virgo expression of it, where they really have everything together. It's almost, the image that I get sometimes is almost like the many-handed Indian deities, that they're able to get so many things done, but always there's the centeredness within them. This Vulcan would help serve to break down patterns of selfish service and the manipulation of matter for one's own ends. This is a complementary to it. So on the personality level, let matter reign, of course, because Virgo is the sign of resources, of course. It wants to have its fingers in as much matter as it can get. But from the soul center position in the moon, it's I am the mother and the child. I, God, I, matter, am. It's a pretty powerful statement. Good mantra if you want to really kind of cohere your energy to say to yourself. Alrighty. Dun, 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 dun. Libra, ruler is Venus on the personality level, of course, and on the esoteric level, it is Uranus. Uranus represents our individualized self-consciousness. It's the synthesizer. It is the form broken down for involutionary and evolutionary alignment within life, and where individuation occurs within the context of the collective. The esoteric teachings are this idea that matter is spirit at its most dense, and spirit is physical matter at its least dense. So it's the idea of two triangles, a triangle descending from the skies coming down, and a triangle coming up from the earth, meeting. That place happens at our heart, our fourth chakra. But it's this blending, it's the involution. When we're born, we are involute. Our soul comes into matter. We incarnate. We literally become meat. We become part of the meat. We bond with meat. So with Uranus, it's where individuation occurs within the context of the collective. Again, we're talking about these higher octaves of it. So where Uranus rules Aquarius and can sometimes be kind of a rebel without a clue, or just wants to be a rebel. On this level, it's an understanding of how it is part of the collective. It's it's not separate from, but it is a part of. It has heightened intuition. It quickens the urge to change established order, especially when it understands that that order is incorrect. It stimulates the aspiration to better the human condition. Of course, it's Libra. And it fosters individual activity within the group context. Great facilitators, of course. We know we have this, these generators, these individuals, the soul-centered individuals born in these years will personify and carry forth the vision of world unity and freedom. They're very much the harbingers of the laws and principles of the new age, as this combination is an embodiment of the Aquarian age on the soul level. Very powerful. Thank goodness there's so many of you out there. So on the personality level, let choice be made. It's about making those choices. Libra, it's always stuck somewhere along the continuum of a choice, whether it's deciding whether to pick which is the right entree for dinner or which conversation to talk about with their friends. I mean, Libra is on the personal level can kind of get bound up in like what choices have to be made. But on the soul center level, it's I choose the way which leads between the two great lines of force. And one of the things I really love about esoteric astrology is that it's the one that finally addresses the fact of what Libra is, because Libra is the only non-organic sign. It's not an animal, it's not a creature, it's not a human, it's an inorganic object, it's a scale. So in esoteric astrology, it represents the pause, so to speak. I'm going to skip over that right now. We'll come at that at the end. So it's the pause. So it's meant to, that's why a good thing for Librans to do really is to kind of take a moment when they're trying to make a choice, take a breath, take a pause, and feel into themselves and find out what their choices they need to make. All right, Scorpio is another one of those double signed ones. And when you think about it, here we've got our second fixed sign. We have, we went from Leo with the sun being both rulers, and now we're moving on to Scorpio, where both rulers are exoteric and esoterically is Mars. And of course, it's going to make sense in a second. So where Mars is in the chart of a soul-centered individual, you'll find where and how the desires of the flesh need to be transformed into the desires of the soul. Where the battle between the higher and the lower self are likely to occur. I mean, it's like kind of like, when you see these movies where people have dreams of fighting themselves, they go into a position where they encounter themselves and they have to fight. It's that higher self and lower self fighting over who's going to have control of the lifetime. Are we going to operate from a lower centered self and operate from a greedy way of taking more than our share and not helping other people? Or are we going to understand that the more that we help other people, the more that we do what we're here to do, the better our lives become and the better the world becomes, and everyone else's as well. It's where you find the primary magnetic attachment of the personality. You can see, that's kind of like one of those little scratchy points in a person's chart, so to speak. Kind of scratch them if you kind of want to get a reaction. And where the soul personality fusion is likely to occur once on the fixed cross, because it's going to be, it has to get reconciled, and so there has to be a fusion, there has to be a coming together of it, because that's what you chose to come in. This is what you chose to be born. So this is the way that you've laid out what the Mars you've picked, so to speak. And Mars represents, of course, our descent into matter. I mean, what else could be incarnating but Mars? It's sacrifice. Sacrifice is another word of cutting into matter, of giving up. Giving up something of value because we know there's something better that we have that we need to get. It's working through our personal material. It's the desire to and release from incarnation. So it is a double-edged sword. It's a ruler of death of both the higher and the lower selves. And it's where we have to do battle with ourselves. We have to understand what our strengths are, where our courage lies. Where desire of the flesh must be transmuted into the desires of the soul, like I said that before. Where you see the primary magnetic personality attachment, and as we said before, it's a higher octave or redeemed by Neptune. On the personality level, let Maya flourish and let deception rule. I mean, you know, Mars wants to rut around. Mars wants to procreate. Mars wants to insert itself. Mars wants to be lost in the fantasy, the sexual fantasy of going forth and placing its seed everywhere it can. Whereas on the soul-centered level, it's the warrior I am, and from the battle, I emerge triumphant. It's coming from a level of consciousness. It's coming from a level of understanding with the Scorpio, the scorpionic sense, that sacrifices have to be made on a much deeper level. It's no longer the youthful Mars that occurred in Aries. It has become more sophisticated, and then it's the soul-centered aspect of it is deepened it to an understanding of where sacrifice really has to be made in order to reach the points we need to reach. Alrighty, and another new introduction is Earth. Something we don't really talk about much in astrology, right? In a sense, it's that point that is, we talk about in a sense, the center of the circle when we look at the astrological wheel. But it actually is that point that's exactly 180 degrees opposing wherever our sun is. It's always exactly opposite where our sun is, you know, where we're grounded. It's the ruler of Sagittarius. It steps away from Sagittarius's buoyant, extravagant self and steps into a place of groundedness, a sense of these are the things that I need to do to step onto the path and do the right thing. So the Earth represents the material self or our body, and our dharma, meaning like what our daily practice is. The reason why we have, in a sense, it kind of helps us understand, you know, with our polarities of wherever our sun is, that ego of that sun has to be balanced by a sense of whatever is on the other side from that sun. The physical location of one's path, so you can see kind of like what type of path you have by where the placement is in your chart. It's where service to humanity takes place, basically, you know, where your shoes hit the ground, you know, where you do the work that's necessary. And one of the ways I like to see it, it's like where the sun's equipment land, the sun's equipment, you know, what those gifts that your sun, that solar self is here, land. It's like it needs a place to be grounded. It has to be structured in somewhere. You are walking on a point of Earth. You were born at a position on Earth. And so it's where that focal point, you are that focal point of light from where that sun is, and you are that grounded earthy sense. And again, the Earth is always 180 degrees exactly opposite from the sun. And through the tremendous duality of the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, the soul-centered individual finally comes to know the path to take on Earth. The dharma of the life is to anchor oneself on the path, to communicate and share with others the focus of this struggle. Sagittarius, you know, it's actually has 3 different rays. One of it is similar to Scorpio and Taurus. Sagittarius can have like hoof and mouth disease. It can get in trouble because out of its innocence, it shares things that can really offend and upset people. And so that can cause drama and trouble in people's lives. On the personality level, we say that Sagittarius shoots its arrow in the air, and where it falls, it does not care. On the esoteric level, as I shoot my arrow in the air, not only do I know where it will fall, but I do care. And it's also done with intention. If you look at the Sagittarian glyph, it's an arrow. So it's really, you know, when Sagittarius is young and immature, it wants a whole bolt of arrows to shoot off in as many different directions. For those of you who have Sagittarian planets or placements, I'm a Sag rising, we're multifaceted beings and we don't really sit still very well. But as you get older, it's important you understand there are fewer arrows in the quiver. You know, you want to shoot with more purposefulness. You want to be more intentional with what you are stepping forward with, and grounding it in that Earth position is really crucial and important. So on the personality level, it's let food be sought. You know, Sagittarius loves a good party. And then from the soul-centered Earths, I see the goal, I reach that goal, and then I see another. It's a very it's not so you know, of this randomness of like, oh, you know, seeking out the food and whatever, wherever the little banquets and parties can be going on. But it's like, I'm seeking with intention. I'm stepping forth to this, and then I'm stepping forth to that. And there's bouncy Earth. Saturn is yet another one of those signs that has a that is ruled both on the esoteric and exoteric level by Saturn. Saturn on the esoteric level represents concrete soul, you know, kind of like that physicality of our soul, so to speak, or the most densest part of our soul. It's the material conditions. It's the keeper of the gate of initiation, or the dweller on the threshold. It's that part that you know, we talk about. The last one says ring past naught, acts as a limit and an antennae to outer planets. It's there's something, there's a responsibility. It's that part, like what we experience traditionally with Saturn, in a sense. It requires a maturity, it requires a level. But on the esoteric level, it's asking for something a little bit deeper. It's asking for a little bit more of a level of commitment. It's asking for a greater level of discrimination and understanding of seeing things so that that the right choices are being made. Saturn for a soul-centered individual by house is where our dharma and duty to the collective can be found. And once we're on the cardinal cross, Saturn doesn't follow us to those realms. It no longer acts as this keeper at the gate, but it's kind of like what I like to say, I kind of feel a little bit more from my Aquarian side, is that Saturn for an Aquarian is that understanding of what is required, of doing the details, of not just being a rebel, not getting caught up in that Uranian side, but building the structures that are necessary so that Uranus can go out there and shine. So in the same kind of sense, in the esoteric level, is if you do your dharma, if you do your work, if you're doing the steps that are necessary, then you understand kind of what the rules are. And then it's not that you aren't refrained by the rules, it's that you can kind of understand how to bend them or work with them in such a way that are the right ways of working with them, and not for the sense of, oh, I'm going to get a car out of this, or I'm going to get, you know, I'm going to manipulate this person to get them into bed. It's done from a much higher purpose, a much higher process of understanding, and then therefore there are higher rules and higher laws that start to come into effect. As Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn on both levels, this position is, of course, very especially powerful. It allows the individual the opportunity to build and ascend the spiritual mountain. Of course, you know, it's the mountain goat, right? Which is the goal for human evolution on the earth. You know, we're here to be successful. We're here to reach, you know, Saturn really teaches it's about reaching, you know, attaining these levels of goals. So on the personality level, it's let ambition rule and let the door stand wide, meaning, you know, get out of the way. I'm going to run for it, and I'm going to make it happen. Mountain goat, you know, when it's on its path, it's just going to rush through, and it really doesn't matter what gets in its way. And it's going to do whatever it needs to do to reach its success. And on the soul-centered level, it's lost am I in the light supernal, yet on that light I turn my back. Yes, Carolyn? You have to turn your microphone on, sweetheart. Thank you.
I don't understand. My brain isn't wrapping around. Lost am I in the light supernal, yet on that light I turn my back.
It's yeah. I mean, these are kind of like the esoteric koans in a sense, and they're very deep. But the image that comes to my mind right away is you know, the Jafra images. The astrological images. He's a Dutch astrologer. If you want to, you know, if you get a chance, look him up. But he has I'd have to look through a little bit. But he has an image of Capricorn, of this mountain goat that is really kind of like standing very proud at the peak of the mountain, and it's like the light is on its back. So it's like you've reached this point, you've reached this culmination point, and you turn on the light because it's on your back, because it's basically imbuing you. It's not that you're really technically,
yes.
It's a lack of attachment to getting the light for being seen for who you are. It's like the lights, it's like when you kind of almost have like a nimbus, you almost have like an aura about you, because like people know, that light is what you exude. That's how I interpret it myself.
That's my millennial. That, yes, now I understand that.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so Aquarius, I love this one. For whatever reason, I find a lot of Aquarians, Jupiter in Aquarius is like I talked a moment ago, traditional ruler for Aquarius is Saturn, of course. Modern ruler is Uranus. The esoteric ruler is Jupiter, which, we talked a little bit about this idea of Jupiter in the sense of having a similar energy to the sun. It has to do with love. It's about fusion. Soul beyond matter, and where we awaken to love regardless of the form. It's our spiritual purpose. It's like our spiritual pathway. It's showing us kind of like where we need to show up, and to bring spirituality. It's not our spiritual heart like Neptune is. And it's how and where your second ray is going to be manifested in your chart, besides, of course, where your sun is. The house placement is going to show the greatest tendency towards where you're going to have fusion and blending of the resources of that house, and how that's going to occur, and where you can actually evoke the most love and wisdom out of your environment. Wherever Jupiter is in your chart, it's kind of like you can literally like milk a little more love and wisdom out of the place when you really kind of understand how that energy works for yourself. So Jupiter on the soul level is the key to the spiritual purpose, of course. It's how one uses it will be revealed by the ascendant and its esoteric ruler. Jupiter's house placement will show where the greatest tendency towards fusion will occur, which fusing with the attributes of the house and sign where it exists in your chart. And by house, where the individual, like I said before, can evoke the most love and wisdom from the environment. Really good thing to do as far as like understanding, if you're wanting to go into areas of teaching or deepening your understanding and awareness of things, like looking where your Jupiters can really help. On the personal level, Saturn and Uranus, let desire and form be the ruler. Aquarius can kind of get stuck in these ideas of form, and its pettiness. I mean, Aquarius can be very petty, and its viewpoint of others, especially because it can be such an egotist. It can be such a living up there in the lofty towers. But in the soul-centered aspect, we understand, that Aquarius holds. It's funny. It's one of those things that is, for many of us, when we learn astrology, when we find that Aquarius is an air sign, we're like, "What do you mean it's an air sign? It's the water bearer. That doesn't make any sense." But when you consider that Aquarius holds this never-ending barrel of water that is pouring forth, it's the water of life, am I, poured forth for thirsty men and women, of course, thirsty beings. I should have put. I'm sorry for masculinizing it. We are close to time already. Oh, got a few minutes. Okay, good. We're close to. So I'm going to leave this up for a second so you can read it. And then I'm going to go into Pisces. And Pisces, actually, this really makes sense when you think about it, right? Pisces is the last sign, so shouldn't it be the last planet that also rules it? Pluto, of course, on the esoteric level, represents breaking down our attachment to form. It's the agent of death for and of desire and our attachments to form again. Surrender of the lower self to the soul. It's kind of like where we don't really have a choice. Not too different from how we look at it personality-wise, and especially how evolutionary astrology looks at it. It's this, it's this breaking down. It's that thing that takes our ego away. So it's by house where one will develop our spiritual will. It's death of the lower self to merge and give over to the soul. We won't have Pluto in Pisces until 2043. It's gonna be next time, and none of us are alive who had Pluto in Pisces from the last time, unless you're really like amazing, and I want to talk to you if that's you. So on the personality level for Jupiter and Neptune, of course, that's the personality rulers, traditional and modern rulers, go forth into matter. Pisces loves to merge, of course. And on the soul-centered level, I leave the Father's house, and turning back, I save. It's another one of those interesting little koans. The father's house, meaning, you know, the house, the oneness. Pluto and Pisces are about this absolute oneness. And so it seems to be more of an idea that comes, I think, from the prodigal son. That's to me more of an Aquarian archetype, but it's this idea of that we have to leave. We have to leave whatever it is we're so used to in order to know what we are. It's funny, I kind of think about the show, you know, Nemo. You know, Finding Nemo. He kind of has to leave his little safe environment to come back and find out, you know, how beautiful and strong, you know, he actually is, as well as Ellen DeGeneres' partner too. Dory, that's right. Speaking of a wonderful Gemini character. So here's a wonderful little overview table for the signs, their rays, their ruler on the exoteric or the personality level, and what those planets are on each ray, the esoteric rulers, and then their rays. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Wow, I can't believe I zoomed through that. I hope I didn't leave anyone with nosebleeds. Yes, Carolyn.
Could you go back to Vulcan and Taurus slide, please?
Yeah.
I just love this. This is the perfect blending that I need. Okay. Only applicable as one is moving from mutable to fixed cross. Can you explain that a little, or is that just something I'm going to have to study?
No, I mean, I am happy to explain that. So it meaning that, of course, you know, Vulcan and Pluto are both about this part of taking away our attachments. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, stepping onto the path of selfhood and awareness means that we have to, we have to let go of things. And if those things are let go, then that power which can take things away from us really doesn't have that power to take it away from us anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how I look at it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michael, this is a great presentation. Thanks so much. It makes me feel like I'm looking back on my life and seeing both sides, the esoteric and the lower side, but I have a funny feeling about the lower side, a little bit of guilt boy, that took a long time. For example, like maybe the sexual expression or certain attachments, and you think, oh my God, that took so many years. And now I've reached this higher understanding. So how do we look at, you know, the past, and how do we come to terms with it?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. I believe that each of us is here to experience that exact, exquisite blend of the most painful and the most joyous in as many different possible ways as each of our little systems allow. And it always just hits us in just the right way. And when I look back on my past, when I talk to people about their past, I like to consider it as that we're all growing, we're all learning. As long as we're occupying a physical body, I feel that we're here still definitely learning and growing. We might have the purpose of teaching for a while, but I really feel that the real point of being in a physical body is a significant physical immersion of a level of education that when we're done with it, we're done with it. And if we're here, we're still having to work on it. And we're working through those processes. So there's a wonderful story called A Chapter in 5 Verses, or Life in 5 Chapters. It's like I walk down the street, I fall into a hole, you know, and then the last one is I walk down a different street. And you know, it takes each of us however many times it takes to learn. I hear you, Linda, on this stuff. I mean, my sexual past, I mean, I wondered at some points if it would ever calm down. And I have to say that I'm finally glad to reach a point of where it has. And I think each of us has to get to whatever that point is and learn what it is. And the compassion and the love for ourselves is in understanding that we need to learn that however much we needed to, so that for those of us especially who are here to be of service to other people and help guide them and to help them to understand themselves in a better way, the more experiences each of us have, the more that people are going to understand and feel that realness that we have within ourselves. And we'll know that when we say, hey, you know what, I know what you're feeling, it isn't like just, it isn't patronizing. It's a real deep understanding and an empathy, rather than, you know, some sort of a kind of a power play. It's something that goes like, hey, you know what, I've walked the path and I've survived, and I'm here to help you walk the path as well.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, any further questions from our audience?
Michael, the quotes at the end of, I can't see it anymore because the chat thing popped up. The quotes at the end of each slide, where are they from?
Those are all from Alan's book.
I should have known.
Yeah, so they're excerpts that he took from from the ancient wisdom teaching. Like they're kind of like keywords for each of the planets, and
Yeah.
So Alice Bailey's work on it. So each of them is they are, to be honest, like you said, I mean, they're a bit of a koan. They're not, you know, it's the sound of one hand clapping, or, you know, does a tree make a sound if no one's there to hear it when it falls in the forest? It's meant to kind of make you think more deeply, but also release our attachment to the form of what we think that means.
I understand. I hear you. They're beautiful, but from Alan, I wouldn't expect anything less.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, Michael, that brings us to the end of your meeting. Any final summing up or thoughts?
Get my last one here. Just I'm available on my website, coremichael.com, or my email is michael@coremichael.com. I came out with a book called Astrological Mavics, which are people who have planets conjunct their angles, and how those energies end up not only affecting those people's lives in significant ways, but also make changes in the world at large for us all to live better possible lives. So thank you so much, Linda, for this wonderful opportunity to speak once again. Thank you all for joining me today and joining us today. Really appreciate it. Blessings to everyone during these very challenging times. Keep your heart open.
Thank you so much, Michael. What an excellent meeting. Thanks so much. Would you all please unmute and thank Michael Bartlett?
Thank you, Michael. This is excellent. My study for the next month and a half, at least.
Wow, I'm honored.
Oh,
Thank you, Michael.
for a gift.
Thank you, Fanny.